Hello. Today, I'd like to have your attention to speak about the importance of balancing our individual rights and the power of majority rule and state authority in our American democratic space. This is an issue that concerns us all in one way or another, but often we don't realize how important it is or the effect that it has on our lives. This issue has a long history, but it's one that has been brought into clear focus by the events of recent decades. I want to begin with a quotation from a document that has had the most influence on the development of our country's political system. In the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson wrote, "We hold these truths to be self evident, that all men are created equal, and that their Creator endows with them certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Here, Jefferson describes these rights as inalienable, which means that they can't be taken away or given away by the government. Uh, these gifts are from God. The rights are given to all people. This is the very definition of equality. Uh, when the framers of our Constitution met to write the documents that became our basic laws, there was an incredible discussion about how to design our government. Most of the debate was about how much power to give the central government. Some of the questions they considered included: should the federal government have specific powers? How much power should it have? And should it have jurisdiction over all the states? So you can see that the framers wanted the federal government to be very, very limited on the amount of power it could possess over the people. Um, there was another debate in the Constitutional Convention, which is less well known, but also very important. This was the debate about majority rule versus individual rights. The framers had three choices to choose from in designing our government: majority rule, individual rights, and equality. By majority rule, I mean the will of the most people. Individual rights mean each person's freedom should be protected, and by equality, I mean everyone should be treated equally before the law, regardless of who they are. The framers recognized that each of these concepts had its benefits as well as its negative effects. So they were trying to find a balance between them. The framers did not want either majority rule or individual rights to become so powerful that they overwhelmed the other. They found the right balance in the federal system. If you look at our Constitution, you'll see that it was written to create a federal system in which power is divided between state and the national government. This means that the states and the federal government share power. The framers wanted each part of our government to have its own set of powers. They wanted the states to be able to make their laws. This was called state sovereignty. And they wanted the national government to be able to make its laws and policies, but not at the expense of state sovereignty. This is important because the states were given some powers in our federal system, and national government was given other powers. So they had separate spheres of authority. This meant that they could balance each other. So how does this relate into our modern world? First of all, certain rights and freedoms are at the heart of what it means to be an American. Our Declaration of Independence and Constitution are the cornerstones of these rights. At our national foundation, we were committed to individual liberty and equality. This commitment was shaped by our history, by the visionary framers who created a new nation that was free of religious intolerance and political oppression. Our framers took great care to protect certain fundamental freedoms in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Uh, this included the right to life, liberty, right to a fair trial, right to worship freely, freedom of speech and press, and right to peaceable assembly and petition. The framers recognized that the liberty to pursue happiness had different meanings for different people. Some would be content with a little bit of money in the bank. Others would want their own business. They felt each person should have a fair opportunity in life and therefore was entitled to their property. The framers recognized that people had to be able to defend their rights against outside threats, especially from the government. They felt a person's safety was a primary concern, giving each citizen the right to bear arms. In setting up our federal system of government, the framers were interested in preserving local rule and guaranteeing individual rights. That's why state courts were given jurisdiction over their laws, but when it comes to federal laws, the national court has jurisdiction over those cases. The framers were also worried about the possibility of an authoritarian government. They were concerned that a single person or faction, if gained control and had too much power, it could take away individual freedoms. To keep this from happening, they created a structure for lawmaking. That meant different parts of government would check each other so there wouldn't be a concentration of power in one branch. They also didn't want the legislature and the executive to have too much power in our laws, but wanted the courts to interpret and enforce them. So as I conclude, I'd like to leave you with this. The framers of our Constitution created a document to protect individual freedoms and did so in a way that made our democracy work. They were men of vision, they were men of learning, and they were men of faith. They gave us the framework for government that would provide the greatest freedoms so that we could govern ourselves. Because, as famously thought, our Constitution was formed not to be a government blessing, but rather a means of government to protect the blessing. This distinction is important. We, the people, are the source of our liberties. Our constitutional democracy subscribes to majority rule and individual rights, but in our form of government, each is held in check by the other. If our government is to be a blessing and not a burden, it should focus on protecting individual rights in a way that benefits all Americans and not just some. So I'd like to thank you for giving me the attention to speak to you about this, and I hope you have a blessed evening. Thank you.